Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is Brian Forbes. Welcome to the Black Factor, where the truth doesn't care about your opinion and facts will override your feelings. That's what we do here. We tell truth, we operate in facts, and we give it to you in the raw. So before we get started real good, I want you to, on my YouTube family, like, subscribe, hit the notification button on you so you can keep up with what's going on with the show. If you're on Facebook, don't forget to like and share. If you're on Twitch, join. If you're on Twitter, follow. And be sure to support black media, because that's what we do here at the Black Factor. We are black media. We're going to give it to you. We're going to tell you things that you probably didn't know. And here's the funny thing. We are critical race theory, which is what tonight's show is about. We're going to talk about critical race theory. We're going to discuss at length why so many people seem to be upset and even angry at the fact that critical race theory seems to be a problem for some people. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to get this party started. So y'all get ready. And here we go. All right. So let me also welcome my Oh So Smooth Radio family. We appreciate y'all for tuning in and hanging out. And of course, y'all know this is a simulcast. We simulcast on that platform at the same time as the regular show. And we're gonna be picking up another station here soon, you guys. We're getting a little momentum going, y'all. I just want you to know we're getting a little momentum going. We're gonna try to make this thing do what it do. But I want to first say thank you all for tuning in and hanging out with your boy. I'm gonna see if I can't give you some food for thought, put some things on your mind, see what we can come up with today. But what we're going to do today mainly, the main thing, we're going to expose the hypocrisy in those who have a problem with critical race theory. And there seem to be there's a growing backlash on this topic. And, I mean, you hate to be the fly on the wall, but it's always the white folks that's mad. Every time black people try to stand up for themselves, every time black folks have something to say about equality or fairness or justice or any of those things, white people tend to get very angry. Isn't that amazing? Regina Freeman, thank you for checking in. I see you, my man. Alejandro, man, look, holla at you, man. You need to give me a call, Alex. I ain't seen you in a minute, man. We got to talk. Anyway, critical race theory. Now, let's kind of get to the roots of it. It is a thing that began in the 80s. It was an idea that was put forward actually at Harvard Law School. Apparently, it was an opportunity for black students in particular to study or to get more information about how the laws are applied and how things operate within the systems that we live on that are based on race. Because we all know, I mean, it's a known fact. It's not the elephant in the room. We all know that there is no justice system. There's a legal system, because there's no justice when it comes to the equal application of the law, which is part of the reason why we've discussed before, which is part of the reason why I have a problem with the death penalty, because we know that the law is not equally applied across the board, and that within itself is an issue. So with that, they began to discuss this at Harvard, and it was to address the lack of diversity in the curriculum. Now, the funny thing about that is that we are also, and have been for a very long time dealing with the lack of diversity in curriculum since black people were allowed to legally be taught in schools. This has always been a thing. So I just find it interesting that people are becoming so upset about that. Um, let's see. My man Casey Coleman said, Brian, America, white and black, but especially white, have a problem with truth. There are grown folks who still believe in Santa Claus. Yeah, Casey Coleman, you are absolutely 100% correct. And that is why we do what we do here at the Black Factor. That is precisely why, because the truth don't care about your feelings. The truth has no use for your opinion. So for people's opinion. So we're gonna work that out. Anyway, Harvard, the school itself, it rejected the idea, and they said that there were no qualified black instructors that would be able to teach these ideas within that institution. And you know I got to get a side eye for that, because we've had people doing African studies and studies on blacks since we've, again, have been in a scholarly position in this country. So that and of course, that's going to always be, again, something coming from a white establishment who are always ready at every turn to tell black people what they can't do, how they should feel, and all of that. And we all know that that's not even a thing. So critical race theory, intellectual movement and loosely organized framework of legal analysis based on the premise that race is not a natural, biologically grounded feature of physically distinct subgroups of human beings, but a socially constructed, culturally invented category that is used to oppress and exploit people of color. Critical race theorists hold that the law and legal institutions in the United States are inherently racist insofar as they function to create and maintain social, economic, and political inequalities between whites and non-whites, especially African Americans. Okay. The one of the problems that we're running into across the board in this country, and particularly where the media is concerned right now, and I notice they've been using these they love to coin phrases, and then they take them and they bastardize them and they turn them into something bad, and that's what we're witnessing right now. I've even heard them say in the media where they start talking about woke. Now, in the black community, we've always made jokes about the woke people. There was a time when being woke actually meant that you were able to operate on a different level, on a higher ideology of thoughts, so that you could literally be able to recognize things that were going on that others may not. That was considered to be woke. You know, the third eye kind of stuff, the pineal gland, that type of thing. But now they've taken, and as usual, co-opted some of the things that we say and do, and now using it as a weapon against us. And so when you start to hear people in the media and the politicians talking about woke, it disturbs me just a little bit. But then that's the same thing about how they love to use the term patriot. And I am of the idea that now anytime I hear the word patriot, I think I'm looking at a racist, because they love their patriotism to the point where they can attack the capital of the United States and be referred to as patriot. So I know now that word has been turned, and I'm now seeing that they're going to turn the idea of being woke into something bad, kind of like how they do with the color black, kind of how they do with all of the other things that they don't like, and they find a way to demonize it. And that's happened throughout the entire history of this country. The students there supported a professor by the name of Derek Bell, and he left Harvard Law in 1980, and he became the dean of the University of Oregon Law School. During his time at Harvard, he developed new courses that studied American law through a racial lens. Harvard students of color wanted faculty of color to teach the new courses in his absence. Bell resigned his position at Harvard because of what he viewed as the university's discriminatory practices. So see, he left there for that very reason, and in fact, they then said there was no one qualified to instruct these students in that way. Since then, that has been somewhat resolved. But at the same time, now that it's become a mainstream topic, kind of like a January 6th. A lot of people don't know. Most people didn't even know what January 6th was prior to Donald Trump, because he turned it into an insurrection when it's nothing more than a formality to verify the presidency. And sometimes people who did not know or weren't even aware that critical race theory was a thing, even though it was practiced in law, or it was born out of the necessity to study law as it affects black folks. These are the things that become prevalent, and they become weapons and tools for the divisive. And we know that we're dealing with a divisive group of people right now that are doing everything in their power to try and strip rights away from United States citizens, particularly those of color. So, Harvard rejected that idea. Anyway, the first time they had a formal meeting that was centered around critical race theory was in 1989. New developments in the critical race theory workshop, an effort to connect the theoretical underpinnings of critical legal studies. Now, see, this is the critical race theory was born out of critical legal studies, and the day-to-day realities of American racial politics. Although its intellectual origins go back much further, to the 60s and 70s, its immediate precursor was the critical legal studies movement, which dedicated itself to examining how the law and legal institutions serve the interests of the wealthy and powerful at the expense of the poor and marginalized. See, so we're dealing with some things that these are things that have always been in the air. And it's like all of a sudden now they want to add this newness to it. Like all of a sudden now this new thing is about to destroy white life. They're so funny. I got so much to say about this. Anyway, in 1995, Gloria Ladson Billings and William F. Tate began applying the critical race theory framework in the field of education, moving it beyond the field of legal scholarship. Thank you for that, Reggie Miles. I see you, my brother. It's good to see you. Now, the thing about race, and this is the part of the thing that bothers me about the idea that they don't like critical race theory. Race is a socially constructed, not biologically, and it's not biologically natural. This is something that was born out of hatred, not just hatred, but economic necessity for those who would benefit and for control. Racism in the United States is normal. It is the common, ordinary experience of most people of color. We experience it on a regular basis. Some choose to acknowledge it, some choose not to. And it's unfortunate when some of these things take place and others don't, and they just kind of blow it off like it didn't really happen. It happened. But we don't get down in the dirt. For example, you see how people in the Jewish community behave when somebody says anything that they don't like or they feel everything is anti-Semitic to them. But we, on the other hand, we let a lot of stuff pass, which we're going to have to stop doing. My man DJ Wajid Muhammad is in the building. I see you, my brother Riri. Hey, Riri, we see you. It's good to see y'all. Tiffany Smith Height is also with us. We appreciate y'all's presence. My man Reggie Miles. So the thing that I think one of the most interesting parts about the anger that we're seeing based around critical race theory is that white people's idea of racism and our idea of what racism is seem to vary, or it's even very different. And the interesting thing is that even the ones who claim that they're not racist don't realize that some of their behaviors are actually racist, but they don't want you to feel that way. They want you to feel like what they're doing is acceptable because they believe it's acceptable, regardless of how you feel about it. It's the continuation of abusers and oppressors telling other people how they should feel. You get to treat me however you choose, and you get to also tell me how I should feel about it. See, these are your people who are angry about critical race theory. These are the people who are walking around with an attitude telling everybody else how to feel about what they choose to call them or how they choose to treat them. And that's just dead ass wrong. They don't get to do that. They don't have the right, nor do they have the knowledge or license where black people are concerned to tell us how we should feel about the way we've been treated. Maya Angelou, she said, people will forget what you tell them. People will forget what you did. But what they will never forget is how you made them feel. And there is no quarter given by many in white society about the feelings of those of black society and what they have to go through on a daily basis. See, they don't want to teach their children about their atrocities. They don't want to teach their children that the things that they've done have denied many black families of generational wealth or the actual distribution of wealth of any kind. This is a microscope. See, critical race theory provides a microscope that makes it possible for them, even them, to see just how much they owe black people in this society, to see just how much damage has been done by their either ignorance because they don't know any better or their hatred because they do. Either one is damaging and it's dangerous. They don't ever get to tell us how we should feel about how we've been treated. See, and I was never one of those people who rode the whole reparation train. I believe that is something that is necessary. I believe that it's something that we are entitled to. However, the more we are evolving within this society over the last 6 or 8 years, I'm more inclined to believe that we need more. We need to be paid. We need to be repaired. Everybody else got repaired. Why haven't we been repaired? You know, racism in America was created by white men. And it was for the purpose of economic power and control. It was used as a protection mechanism for them. One day, soon, I'm going to do a show and we're going to talk about pre-slavery rebellions, or should I say pre-chattel slavery rebellions, such as Bacon's Rebellion. If you ever get an opportunity, you can look up Bacon's Rebellion. It was one of the more studied and more historical rebellions that kind of gave rise to the necessity to divide up the servants, so to speak, the servitude, those who were indentured servants, which were black, white, and other. But they began to divide those up because they needed to control the masses, because the people with all of the money, there wasn't enough of them to protect themselves against those who would take what they have once they got bold enough and said, you know what, I'm tired of, you treating me like this, and I'm going to just take mine and kill you in the process. So there's a whole story behind that. But once again, if critical race theory was taught in school, these would be some of the topics. And once again, we know that they don't want those truths to come forward. Those who are in the dark, those who are ignorant, and those who don't know, they would prefer that they not know. They would prefer that their children not know how this country really got where it is. They don't want them to know that, because then that means they have to actually explain their barbaric behavior and the things that they lied about. If some of those people actually knew history and sat down and took the time to actually read some of this stuff, you would be amazed at how much they don't know. And if they took the time to learn some of this stuff, things would be very different. But ignorance is bliss. And a lot of folks don't want to know, because they'd rather remain ignorant and wallow in their privilege and pretend that they don't know. Dr. King called that conscientious stupidity and sincere ignorance. Yeah. So the very ideas that the foundation of this country is based on, the Constitution itself has racism written into it. And the funny thing is, we're still trying to make it work in our favor. Slavery is still in the Constitution, 13th Amendment. They said it is abolished except for incarceration. If you get locked up, if you get picked up for a crime, they can actually make you a slave all over again, which thoroughly explains why our neighborhoods always have been and always will be over-policed, because they need more slaves. They need more free labor. They need people in the prison system, which y'all have no idea how much. I ain't gonna say y'all have no idea. Some of y'all do know. The prison industrial complex has a huge GDP. That institution alone generates billions of dollars simply by making sure they have enough beds filled in the prisons across the United States, and in multiple ways. And politically, it helps. Check this out. I don't know how many of y'all know this, but I'm gonna drop this in right quick. When they build prisons, the first thing is they go to, and this is part of the whole prison industrial complex. And I don't know how many of y'all actually got a copy, but if you don't, you need to get your copy. Get your copy of the Black Factor. You know, I gotta keep them on sale at my website, bmforbes.com. But in there, I talk about the fact that the prison industrial complex, those who control those corporations, it's a corporation. You know, corporations are about making money. And what they do is they go to neighborhoods, urban neighborhoods, and they check the reading scores of 3rd and 4th graders. Then they can determine how many of them are going to wash out, how many are going to drop out. They have statistically speaking, they can pinpoint what's going to be a high crime area in a very short time. They over-police those areas, and then they build prisons, not within the neighborhoods, not within in the area, but just outside in these rural suburbs, these white areas. And I'm going to tell you why they do that. This goes toward the census. Now, see, this is why we need to make sure that we have that we participate and complete our civic duties, like jury duty and census and things like this. All of this is for a reason. See, we don't participate in these things, and then we turn around and complain about the situation that we're under. If you don't participate in the system, you can't change it. You have to be inside of it. The same way white folks infiltrate all black organizations throughout history, they had to be on the inside using somebody on the inside in order to bring them down. In order for us to get what we want out of our government, we have to be a participant within it. Now, they then build these prisons outside and in generally conservative neighborhoods and areas, right? And when they do that, they turn around, and when the census comes, those prisoners are counted on the census. When they're counted, they become residents. They're considered residents of that county or that part of the state. So in other words, if you got a predominantly black population in a prison system outside of a major city and in a region where, let's say, Donald Trump supporters live, let's just use that, they can increase their ability to gain representatives in the Congress and the Senate because the population is that much higher because of these people. But we all know that those representatives are not representing those prisoners, but those numbers help them to get into office. See where I'm coming from? See how you get used? And then while you're in prison, you got people in there that literally, I know someone who went to prison and damn near became an optometrist. Got out and couldn't get a job doing the same thing, but was making eyeglasses and other products for major corporations out here. Not getting paid what they're supposed to get paid, just working. And they call it rehabilitation, but at the same time, they're making money for private industry. See, so you're being loaned out. You're being sold into slavery to do the work of a major corporation, the plantation, while you are incarcerated. You see where I'm coming from? See, all of this is intended to work together. But if they have to start talking about critical race theory, they got to talk about all of this. They don't want to talk about all of this because they don't want you to see the game. They don't want you to see how this system works in their favor and how we're being used and don't realize it. Got to do your homework. The very foundation in the Constitution that we live under right now still does not benefit us. And in order for the things that we need to change in our favor, we must be a part of that system. I have never in my life, and this is the most amazing thing in the world to me, when I see people talk about, oh, I don't vote. For what? It don't mean nothing. Well, number one, if it didn't mean anything, they wouldn't be working as hard to take it away from you. And number two, I've never seen anybody try to win a war by not fighting. That's not how this works. The only reason we even have a thing called Black History Month is because black people have been excluded from the historical aspects in our current curriculum within our institutions of learning in America. We have to have Black History Month to bring light and attention to those who deserve the accolades that no one has ever given them because they were dismissed by white society, because that's the way they wanted it. But now we have critical race theory, which has them shaking in their boots. I saw a lady on TV the other day shaking and crying and just having a great time. She was very upset. I don't want to teach my children hate. Oh, is that what this is? Teaching your children the truth now equals hate. Imagine that. But then, like everything else, they will take this narrative and run with it and do as they please. Kind of like how y'all remember when Colin Kaepernick took a knee, when he first took a knee in protest of police brutality and injustice. Instead of those people who got so upset accepting the fact that he took that knee and clearly made it clear that he took that knee because he was protesting the injustices in America. Well, that wasn't good enough. So they then co-opted it, just like they're co-opting critical race theory, and they made it whatever they said it was, and that's the end of it. Skip the facts, forget the truth, forget anything about anybody benefiting from the truth. We don't want to hear about it because y'all are being racist, which by definition, black people cannot be. Let's just remember that. We've been over that definition multiple times, but for those who are not clear, I'm going to state it one more time. We do not have the power to be racist in America. We've never had the opportunity to tell anybody where they could live, what school they could go to, how much money they could make, what water fountain to drink out of, and the list goes on. We do not have the power to be racist in America. So any white person who believes that black people are capable of being racist. Now, I didn't say they couldn't be bigots. We got some black bigots, but they don't have the ability to be racist. That is an inherently white trait, and it only belongs to those who created racism. Without their invention of racism, we don't have racists. So the need for Black History Month stems from the fact that so many have been excluded. Do we have any idea, y'all, how many lies and how deep the lies that are being taught within our educational institutions really are? There are misconceptions. They're just flat out lies, some of them. And they paint a picture that allows for white right, the white right, for white to be right. They allow for themselves to be the heroes, the saviors. Y'all know we talk about the savior mentality on here. We've talked about it before. The savior mentality is a very dangerous thing. And there are a lot of folks who believe that without someone white to come in, swoop in, and save the day, that we will perish. We've never needed them, ever. But without them feeling as though we need them, they are offended, which is how Tulsa, Oklahoma got burned, and several other places. Anytime black people are thriving and doing their thing, something like this happens. As an example, there's a place called let me back up. There was a place. Y'all know I've been doing this lately with these different towns and cities. There was a place called Seneca Village, and Seneca Village was an all-black community in New York. Y'all know what Seneca Village is now? Central Park. Seneca Village, a supposedly progress-minded city administration, evicted a well-established minority community after arbitrarily paying its residents for their possessions. In other words, they got pennies on the dollar for their property. I actually got some family who had several hundred acres of land in Tennessee that was lost to eminent domain, very much like this. It's now a bird sanctuary. Seneca Village was one of the main black settlements in New York City in the 19th century. It had 264 residents, 3 churches, 2 schools, and 3 cemeteries at the time of its destruction in 1885. Central Park was born. The park was being built mainly to benefit real estate tycoons. Before Central Park was created, the landscape along what is now the park's perimeter from West 82nd Street to West 89th Street was the site of Seneca Village, a community of predominantly black, many of whom owned property. Now, this is despite the rhetoric that you will hear and read across the internet that says that they were squatters. They want you to believe that these people were not productive members of society and who did not generate income. So here's the thing. Central Park, a nation's first great municipal park in the supreme achievement of New York City, and it's where New Yorkers go to walk and touch the grass and play, and where they go to breathe. Without Central Park, life in the nation's biggest city would be incalculably poorer, in some respects almost unlivable, particularly for poor who cannot easily journey elsewhere. So, in other words, they've taken a black community, destroyed it, and set it up for white folks. Seneca Village began in 1825. See, they want you to believe these people were squatters, right? As a community of blacks, when landowners in the area, John and Elizabeth Whitehead, subdivided their land and sold it as 200 lots. So they broke it up into pieces and they sold 200 lots to any buyer. Andrew Williams, a 25-year-old African-American shoe shiner, bought his first 3 lots for $125 each. Epiphany Davis, a store clerk, bought 12 lots for $578. And the AME Zion Church purchased another 6 lots. From there, a community was born. So these were property owners. These were landowners. These were not people who just popped a tent in the area or built a shanty or whatever you want to call it. By 1855, the village was consisted of approximately 225 residents, made up roughly 2/3 African American, 1/3 Irish immigrants. And you got to understand, too, the Irish at that time were treated probably as bad or worse than black folks. So, of course, they lived over there with black people. And a smaller number of individuals of German descent. So there was a few Germans living there, too. So 30% of his 264 residents were Irish American. There was nothing illegal about this place. Everything about it was legitimate. And the citizens who lived there paid taxes like anybody else. Compared to other African Americans living in New York, residents in Seneca Village seem to have been more stable and prosperous. By 1855, approximately half of them owned their own homes. With property ownership came other rights not commonly held by African Americans in the city. And guess what the right they had to do because they were property owners? This is 1821. They had the right to vote. Although only about 10 of them actually voted, they had the right to vote. In 1821, New York State required African American men to own at least $250 in property and hold residency for at least 3 years to be able to vote. Out of the 100 black New Yorkers eligible to vote in 1845, 10 lived in Seneca Village. One of a few black enclaves at the time, Seneca Village allowed residents to live away from and more built-up sections of downtown Manhattan and escape unhealthy conditions, racism, and oppression. So it was kind of like being out the way. They was not directly in the city, but they were out of the way, you know. So they, but of course, you know how they do. They spread around. They spread over there. Despite New York State's abolition of slavery in 1827, discrimination was still prevalent throughout New York City and severely limited the lives of African Americans. And yes, they still had slave catchers running around who would catch runaway slaves as well as kidnap free black people, because we know they did that too. Despite its short history of only 32 years, Seneca Village is understood as a tight-knit community that served as a stabilizing and empowering force in uncertain times. So, census records show that residents were employed, with African Americans typically employed as laborers and in service jobs, the main option for them at the time. Records also show that most children who lived in Seneca Village attended school. So see, if you believe the narrative, the other narratives, they don't want to talk about that. Now I'm going to tell you, I read some other stuff about Central Park as I was getting myself ready for this right here. And it's really interesting the way they downplay the people who lived there prior to having been evicted and moved out of the area for the purpose of land development. And this park, well, and also the park had resources right next to the Hudson River and a few other, it's got a couple of ponds, that kind of stuff. So it was a very, self-sustaining kind of area. So let's see. It's about 1,600 people were displaced when they moved this thing. Yeah. So anyway, that is just to give you a quick idea about just how critical race theory will affect the children of these angry people. See, the fear is that their children will actually learn the truth. They may actually learn something outside of the lies that we're constantly being fed in these school systems. These people, they're very upset. They're angry. I've been watching newsreel after newsreel of angry white folks going off about critical race theory, politicians. They've latched on to the idea that talking about or teaching their children about real history of America is going to make these children hate themselves. I saw a man say, I don't want my children growing up hating that they're white or hating themselves. He didn't say that they're white. He just said hating themselves. But here's the funny part. The school systems and the system to which we live under within this country has taught, ingrained, and just literally been a part of the fabric of America that our children hate themselves. So now I guess the chickens are coming home to roost. Now you're upset because the truth could potentially come out. This is what's been taught to black children for as long as education has been available to black people in America legally. Because let's remember, there were laws in place that said black people are not allowed to learn. They're not allowed to learn to read. You're not allowed to learn to count. But now that we have learned to read and we have learned to count, although in subpar conditions for a very long time, things are changing. So, I mean, like right here in Texas, there was a big debate, an argument about stuff in the textbook. In a textbook, they wanted to put in there that slaves were immigrants. Like they came to this country voluntarily. Like they voluntarily came here and worked as farm laborers. It's a misconception. It's a flat out lie. But this is the revisionist history that they want us to believe. They want their children to grow up, the next couple of generations to believe. You got to remember that this is something that I thought about this kind of heavily in recent months, because I always wonder how sometimes we end up where we are. But I then realized that so many of us don't know our history. Here's what happens. It usually takes about no more than 3 generations for people to forget a lot of stuff, and for things not to be relevant anymore, for certain jokes not to be funny because people don't understand the context of them because it's a different time. 1 to 2 generations, that's usually how that works. So while it could be a negative thing when things get forgotten, it could also be a positive thing because we have the opportunity to plant seeds, which is their fear, that the seed of critical race theory being planted in the minds of their children is going to actually cause them to maybe have some compassion for their fellow man, to not benefit from the whiteness, the white privilege. They're afraid of that. The textbooks within our school systems, for example, teach that Thomas Edison was the so-called inventor of the light bulb. Yet, you never hear them mention Lewis Latimer. Who is Lewis Latimer? Lewis Latimer he received a patent on January 17th of 1882 for the process of manufacturing carbons. And what does that mean? That means that it's an improved method of production for carbon filaments for light bulbs. But here's the point. Without Lewis Latimer's carbon filament, you don't have light bulbs. But they don't tell you that part in the school books. All they tell you about is Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Yes, he did. No. 1874, Latimer co-patented with Charles M. Brown an improved toilet system for railroad cars called the water closet. So every time y'all are on a bus, a plane, a train, and you go to the bathroom, you think about Lewis Latimer. That's a black man. They're not going to teach you that in them school books. In 1876, Alexander Graham Bell employed Latimer, then a draftsman at Bell Patent Law Firm, to draft the necessary drawings required to receive a patent for Bell's telephone. But they're not going to tell you that part. He did the drawings, the technical drawings for the invention in order for it to be patented. See, why doesn't his name appear repeatedly in school books? In the same school books where they talk about Alexander Graham Bell and the light bulb guy. Why? Because they don't want you to know that part. They don't want you to know Lewis Latimer, a black man without whom none of these fantastic advancements would be where they are. They're not going to tell you that part. In 1879, he moved to Bridgeport, Connecticut. He was hired as an assistant manager and a draftsman for the U.S. Electric Lighting Company, a company owned by Hiram Maxim, a rival of Thomas Edison. And while he was there, he invented a modification to the process of making carbon filaments, which aimed to reduce breakages during the carbonization process. I ain't going to explain the details to that, but you get my point. The list for him truly goes on. Latimer also developed a forerunner of the air conditioner. So see, while you sitting there in your AC in your house, cooling out, you in that cool boardroom, Lewis Latimer. He developed the forerunner of what is now the air conditioner. It's called apparatus for cooling and disinfecting. In 1894, Latimer pursued a patent on safety elevator, which prevented the riders from falling out and into the shaft. See, get on the elevator, think about Lewis Latimer. Now, is critical race theory a way of understanding how American racism has shaped public policy, or a diverse discourse that pits people of color against white people? Well, depends on who you ask. Liberals or conservatives, which are both very opposing in this idea. So this topic, of course, is on fire in the media, like we were saying. Now, I said all of that to make a point. When black children do not hear about other black people who have made great strides in the history of this country and in the development of America, they're sitting there in the classroom thinking to themselves, all of these great white men. See, I want you to understand how this plays on the psyche of a child. No one great that's black is presented to them. The first thing they're going to be taught is Martin Luther King. And sometimes they're going to stop right there. What I'm saying is that when black children are not taught that their kind, their people, were involved in the development of everything around us. And when I say everything, I mean everything. See, a lot of people don't want to hear that because they don't want to believe that it's possible that without black inventors, black thinkers, black lawyers, black doctors, we are not where we are today. Without slavery itself, America is not where it is today. You don't have the economic powerhouse that became America without the free labor and the blood, sweat, and tears of black people. That's critical race theory. They don't want to talk about that part. They don't want to talk about the loss of generational wealth that comes with that. When these towns and these places were burnt down and destroyed out of the hatred and greed of white people. They don't want to talk about that part. They did this. We didn't do this, but they're mad at us. Isn't that amazing? See, our children need to see people in their textbooks who represent the greatest accomplishments in America, for those who have made those accomplishments. And there have been many who have been passed over, all the way down to soldiers who have committed valiant acts of bravery and other things for this country. Crispus Attucks, the very first person to die in the Revolutionary War, a black man, who led the charge, by the way. But you don't get to hear about him. Now, it depends on the school system that you're in, because I am happy to say that when I was coming from Chicago, we were taught, because most of our schools were predominantly black, because Chicago's a very segregated, to this day, a very segregated city. And because we live in a place like Chicago, our teachers, who were mostly black, fortunately, took the time to give us this curriculum. And this was before they started all of that nonsense that Bush and them put in place. I can't remember the name of it, where the children had to be, they basically was learning how to take a test and not learning and getting any education. The same reason they took civics out of schools, because they don't want you to understand how the system works. They want you dumb. They want you ignorant to the way the system works. That way they can continue to try and pull tricks and do the things that they're doing. This is why right now we're going through this thing with the voting rights laws. See, we've been fighting for voting rights since we were freed in this country. And it's only getting worse. Jim Crow 2.0 is on the rise. And something got to be done. So, many of these comforts that all of us enjoy, white and black alike, have been made available by black folks in this country who get no recognition, who are not in the history books, not the ones they want to teach to their children, which is dead ass wrong. It's racist. Period. Period. Point blank. Without the Lewis Latimers, the Garrett Morgans, without the Elijah McCoys, y'all ever heard that term, say the real McCoy? Elijah McCoy is the reason the real McCoy is a term. A black man. He invented an oil system, an oiling system for locomotives. And there were other people who tried to infringe on his invention, and they made similar products. And when people would go to buy this product, they then started to say, no, I want the real McCoy. That's where that term came from, a black man. That's history. They're not going to teach you that. Yusuf Aliel, I appreciate you, brother. Thank you. No Child Left Behind. That was the name. That was what I was looking for. That was the name of that BS process that our children had to go through, and my children had to go through it. Fortunately, we teach from home, as they say. You know, you got education starts at home, so that's where we began our education with our own children. But the fact is, the world benefits from people like Mr. McCoy. And as a matter of fact, Patricia Bath. Y'all know who Patricia Bath is? She's the one who invented or created the ability for people to have cataract surgery. Black woman. Sarah Boone, who improved the ironing board, who made the ironing board what it is. She owns a patent for that. See, these are the things they're not going to talk to you about. Little black children don't get to see the greatness of their own kind and who they are. And that within itself does not build the esteem necessary for black children to come about in the world and be as successful as they could be, because they don't think that it's even possible. We don't have enough positive reinforcement within the school systems that allow for equal grounds, equal teaching, the ability for us to have our children to believe that when we say things to them, that it's actually true. See, if they had to teach critical race theory in these schools, it would take away the opportunity for white people to try to prove that they're superior. They don't want that. They've stolen patents. They've stolen property. Hell, they even stole people. So you know nothing else is above them. Beneath them. They'll do anything. If you'll steal people, you'll do anything. They'll steal anything else. Then they'll create laws to make that theft okay. And this is what's happening right now. This is what we're watching. This is what we're witnessing. We're living in a time where things are being taken away. We cannot sit still for this. We cannot sit here and pretend like this is not happening. It's happening. I pray that it doesn't have to come to very tragic circumstances before we decide to wake up and do something about it. And my number one rule, y'all, you got to vote. You have to. You got to get on the inside. There are ways for this to be fixed, but the collective energy has to be there, and we have to be on the same page. Now, that's a stretch, but, you know. They continue to create laws that oppress. These new voter laws, they're oppressive. I mean, let's keep it 100. In Georgia, if you standing in line waiting to vote, now see, they closed down a bunch of polling places. See, they just show you how they put the squeeze on. They closed down all these polling places. They said no more Sunday voting, no more voting after a certain time, no more drop boxes, no more people to help collect voters' registration. Then they say if you're standing in line to vote, now that they've destroyed all of those means by which to vote, they're going to create these long lines at only a couple of polling places for people to be standing outside waiting forever to vote. Weather conditions be damned. And if I were up to you and attempt to give you a bottle of water in that process, I have just committed a felony, and now they have the opportunity to make me a slave of the state. 13th Amendment, back to that. You see how that works? It has now become criminal to give an elderly person in line to vote sustenance. This is where we're going in America. And they justified these atrocities by claiming voter fraud, which they have yet to prove. In fact, and it's amazing, and the minute you ask one of them, where's the voter fraud? Oh, you can't see it? No. How about you provide some evidence? They can't do that. There is none. If it were some, they would have put it out there months ago. It ain't happened yet. It is not going to happen because it didn't even happen in the first place. But then they're claiming, oh, we need the integrity of the voting system to be in place. It has been stated by people in the conservative crowds and in the cabinet of the last president that this was the most secure election in the history of the United States. Yet, every state is working overtime to change the law because they're losers. They lost. They're so upset. This is the same group of people who called everybody snowflakes. Oh, they're snowflakes. These snowflakes. What do you call yourselves? They lost and lost their mind and started changing laws so that the next voting cycle, they could pretend like they actually won fair and square if they do win. But I suspect that people have had almost enough of this. It's coming down to it, finally. It's taking too long. But the proof was in the last election. I wasn't worried about Donald Trump retaking office because I knew he had done far too much damage, even to those who don't want to admit to it. You have people within the Congress and in the Senate who have said one thing one day and something else the next because they had to kiss the ring of the Emperor Trump. He won't be around much longer. His days of trying to invoke his autocracy are coming to a close. Also, Smooth Radio family, you all are welcome to join me on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, or Twitter. Y'all have yourselves a good night. Okay, so everybody else. So the deal is, I wasn't worried. I wasn't concerned about him returning to the White House because I knew that he had done a lot of damage. And he's still doing damage. There's not enough of them in the way that they do things. They just make a lot of noise. Proof of that, last election. I suspect that the midterm election is going to look a lot like the last election. There's going to be a high turnout, higher than probably ever. It's probably going to be historic. And like Regina Freeman said, the pedophile is going to jail. Yeah. And I believe that he's got some silver bracelets coming his way. And if not him, definitely some of his family members and, of course, his CFO of his company. It's a lot happening. And the crazy part is that we're only 6 months, 7 months into this presidency. And look at all the stuff that's happened since January. It's crazy. But it's okay, because we still got 3.5 more years to get this mess cleaned up and to turn the tide of this hatred that's taking place. These critical race theory people, critical race theory fearing individuals. See, all they're doing is trying to create new ways to cheat legally. They're making the law. See, that's always been the downfall, or not the downfall, but the demise to black folks. They make laws to hurt us. But if we're not there to stop it by participating in the process, these laws are going to continue to come forward and harm us even more. If y'all think for 1 second that black folks in this country can't come real close to ending up back in change, y'all better wake up. Trust me, it ain't that far off. And you also better realize that all they got to do is make a couple of laws, and it'll change the entire game. When Barack Obama got elected to office, y'all, it wasn't so much that I was happy about Barack Obama. I'm going to tell y'all what made me happy. What made me happy was when I hear a parent tell their child, their black daughter, their black son, that they could be president one day, that they could finally be saying that and it not be a lie, that the possibility is actually real. It's actually a reality. That was very, very moving for me, despite everything else. That by itself helped to create a foundation of self-esteem within black children that they are so afraid that's going to happen if critical race theory becomes a thing in their schools. They are afraid that young black children's self-esteem will actually be boosted, that young black children will see themselves as equal. This is the fear. They're afraid that their children will ask them the hard questions. They're going to ask them, why did white people do this? Why did they enslave? Why did they put chains on these people? Why did they murder and kill these people? Why did they do all of these things? They don't want to have to answer that. And they're definitely not going to answer it honestly. We know this. So, this is also the reason why we know that they're not going to talk about buck breaking in the history books. They're not going to talk about the lynchings and the beatings. They're not going to talk about the rape. They're not going to talk about how they branded slaves with a hot iron. They're not going to talk about Oklahoma, the only place in America ever bombed by air. They don't want to talk about that stuff because they got to answer those questions. See, those are difficult questions that they don't have answers for, not for their children. Casey Coleman said, Forbes, when I traveled to Cape Town and found out that their Google is even as racist as they're saying that Dr. Christensen Bernard did the first open heart surgery is in Chicago, known that Daniel Hale Williams, a black doctor in the black hospital, Provident, did the first one using comedic surgical cleaning technique. Yeah, well, and there you go. You have other people in other countries who know as much or more about our history than some white folks in this country because they want to dismiss our ability. They're not going to talk about these things. They're not going to talk about the families that were torn apart and the children sold off. See, that's critical race theory. You want to know why black people are in the condition that they're in today? Well, you have to do the history that leads up to today. You have to understand all of the dynamics that are at play that created the climate under which we live today. This all came from somewhere. It didn't just pop up one day. We didn't just show up and everything was bad. Police was going around killing black folks, and so on. None of this just happened. It came from somewhere. It was born of greed and hatred by only one group of people. Those with the power to actually be racist. Those with the power to tell black people where you can live, where you can't live, how much money you can make, what jobs you can hold. Here's an opportunity. They don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about the fact that redlining in America is a government-sponsored institution. Yes, that's where redlining began. You don't know what redlining is? Let me tell you right quick. It's where black folks only allowed to live within a particular area, without which they won't get a bank loan. They won't get FHA backing. They will not get any of the things that anyone else would get. Redlining was born out of the United States government. They don't want to talk about the Tuskegee experiment. They don't want to talk about the fact that they poisoned multiple black men. They don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about the inhumane behavior that allowed them to even have a Tuskegee experiment. They don't talk about that in the history books. They want to tell you that they'll have you to believe that Lincoln freed the slaves. The only reason Lincoln freed the slaves, it had nothing to do with him giving a damn about slavery. What it had to do was with him trying to cripple the South economically, because if they could have won the war or been able to maintain the status quo without the South being pissed off, things would still be the same. We'd damn near probably still be in slavery. The only reason Lincoln freed the slaves was to hurt the South economically, to take away their free labor, without which none of them would be wealthy, without which none of them would be harvesting all the sugar cane, all the cotton, all the tobacco, all the indigo. Without free labor, they don't become the wealthy people that they were. This country doesn't get built the way that it has without that. So Lincoln knew what to do. He snatched them up. He snatched up all the free labor and then made some of them soldiers. Without whom, by the way, they may very well have lost this war. And then, of course, we'd still be enslaved. All I want to know is, why must we continue to be ignored historically? Why don't white children know the truth about their own ancestors and their dirt and their anger and their hatred, their violence? Why don't they know? Why don't you want to tell your kids about how y'all get down? Why don't white adults know that? They don't get to dismiss the past or the truth simply because they don't like how it looks. They don't want their kids to know that great granddaddy was a racist. He actually was the one that led the march, that the lynch mob that broke into the jail and hung that young man in Oscarville, Georgia, and so on. Why don't white children learn from their schools that black people weren't even considered human for a very long time? Why don't they teach them that? All sanctioned by constitutional law. Why don't they teach their children that? What's wrong with this critical race theory? What is the fear? What are y'all afraid of? What are you scared of? I'm going to tell y'all why. Because if white children found out how adults of their ancestry behaved, they might actually gain some compassion. They might actually be people who will make a conscious decision not to treat other human beings that way. Because children are very pliable. Children don't see color until they're taught to see it, until they're taught to hate it. Somebody has to ingrain these things in them. And when they sit and they watch the school books and they see themselves, even them, when they read the school books and they see, look at all these wonderful white people, look at all the good stuff they did. I'm very proud of myself. Stick their chests out. And then you get black kids looking at the same school books and they're going, well, how come we ain't no black people in here? What did we do? We didn't do nothing? Oh, man, I feel bad. My people don't do nothing. I want to be white. Takes us back to the doll experiment. Yeah, which doll is bad and which one is good? See, these are the things that get instilled in our children at a very early age. And if we're not careful, if we don't get on this stuff and make sure that our children understand who they are, this is how they get affected by these things. They don't want their children to know that black people are actually people. People who have contributed in every conceivable possible way to the building and the foundation of America. The building of this nation. See, that this critical race theory weakens the narratives and the ideas that they have put forward for centuries. It tells the truth. And y'all know what they say about the truth. The truth hurts. They want you to believe black folks ain't smart enough, not fast enough, not good enough. This is the reason why they worked so hard for so long to keep black people out of sports and other areas. And I use sports as an example because they tried as hard as they could to keep black folks out of it. But the fact is, you can't consider yourself to be the best unless you go up against those who seem like they might be better than you at some sports. If you don't have the best of the best in there, you can't call yourself a World Series champion. If you got a team over here that you discriminate against, that you got segregated, that'll run circles around you. And I'm talking about the black baseball leagues, for example. They finally had to figure out that if the worst black baseball team played the best white baseball team, it'd be a game. They had to get to the point where it's like, okay, well, wait a minute. Yeah. So they had to include black people in sports. And of course, what do we do when we were in there? Dominate. Why? Thought we wasn't smart enough. Thought we wasn't fast enough. Thought we weren't good enough. You can't name one arena that black folks have not finally been allowed to enter into because they were so extremely talented, because of, like they used to say all the way back in the day, you had to be twice as good, twice as smart, twice as fast if you black. And that's a damn shame. But hey, all it did was make us stronger, faster, smarter. It is what it is. They say they don't want to teach their children to hate themselves. But I don't think it's about the children. It's about them. It's about those who claim they don't want their children to learn this stuff. Their real fear is not for their children. Their real fear is for themselves, because they know what it is to enjoy white privilege. They know what it is to enjoy white supremacy. They know what it is to enjoy the fact that being white means that they don't have to look over their shoulder when they get pulled over by a police officer. They don't have to worry about if they have words with someone on the street that someone's going to call the police, and by virtue of them being a certain color, they might stand a chance of being killed because the police have been weaponized. They don't have those problems. They don't want their children to know what that's like. And that's fine. It's a bit of self-preservation. But the fact is, we ain't going nowhere. Ain't none of that go back to Africa. Because if we start talking about going back places, there's only one group of people here that stole a bunch of people, stole a bunch of land, killed a whole bunch of folks. You want to start talking about going back somewhere, it's a whole bunch of places they can go. That'll welcome them with open arms. Maybe. I don't know. This is the same reason. I want y'all to realize this. Same way they don't want to talk about this critical race theory, and they don't want their children to be marred by the ideas of critical race theory. These are the same reasons why there is no movement on gun legislation. Now, what does that have to do with it? Let me show you. See, again, we back to the law. Understand that the first gun laws that were enacted in the United States were in 1619. Before it was the United States, it was the colonies. And the first gun laws stated that no indigenous people, Indians, or blacks could own guns. Almost every gun law that has been put into place throughout the history of guns in this continent, on this particular part of the continent, have been created in order to keep guns out of the hands of black folks. All the way up to the 60s and 70s when they enacted laws when Reagan was governor in California, and they stopped allowing people to carry firearms because of the Black Panthers. That's just one. I went from 1619 to 1969. So my point is that there's a whole lot that went on in between those two times as well. But you're not going to see any movement in the gun legislation because it allows them to maintain the status quo. So you got to remember, without the guns, there was no colonization. Without the guns, there's no way to strike fear into those they oppress. Without guns, there's no way to enforce laws that harm others. This is why the gun laws have all been put into place to keep black folks in line. But now, even though you see, even that guy who shot up the congressman that time, you see all these people being killed, mass murders, shootings going on everywhere. If any gun laws are put into place, that immediately and effectively takes away the rights of everyday individuals who believe that their guns will save them from anything. See, critical race theory. Here's a fact. White folks use their guns, have used their guns as threats and effectively throughout the history of these United States to maintain order. They will never change the gun laws. Trust and believe that. They know if they do, those same laws are going to affect them at this point in the game. See? They're not going to change them. You don't get nothing in this life without giving something up first. Most of the white folks across America who have a problem with critical race theory, they're either uneducated about history and don't know any better, or they're just straight out racist. And they don't care about what anyone else needs, thinks, feels, or they're both. They're ignorant and they're racist. That's the America we live in. Now, before we go, I want to show y'all, I want to tell you something. Down in Florida, right? Ron DeSantis, the governor, remember, I don't know how many of you know this. Well, he made a law earlier this year about protesters, that if protesters were blocking streets and intersections and things like that, motorists had the right to run them over. Well, guess what? Now he's got that backfiring in his face because the Cuban people are pissed off. Cuban American protesters shut down a section of the Palmetto Expressway in Miami to demonstrate unity toward the civil unrest that's currently taking place in Cuba. Now, see, they protesting over here about something going on in another country. And they protesting in the streets. And they always ask us, why are we protesting? What we got to protest? Now, the question could easily apply to them. Why are they protesting? They're not even in Cuba. But they are. On April 29th, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed an anti-riot bill into law. And that was after the George Floyd thing, right? The bill states that protesters could be arrested if gathering could be considered a riot. Also, it deems blocking a freeway a felony and gives full immunity to persons who drive through protesters that are blocking a roadway. You know, you got to be one hateful individual. I'm not going to call him a human being, to run through a crowd of people because you feel some kind of way. That's the equivalent of a mass shooter. You don't like what's going on, so you pull out your AR and you just start blasting. But this is what he's given them license to do. Well, DeSantis received a considerable amount of pushback from Democrats, of course, who felt that the bill was unfair and targeted blacks and brown communities disproportionately. Upon signing the bill, DeSantis stated that the bill was needed to protect Florida residents on the road. So during these protests, there weren't any arrests. Now, you heard what I said. They blocked the expressway, but there haven't been any arrests. And of course, it set off a firestorm on Twitter in retaliation to the treatment of Black Lives Matter protesters. So in other words, you willing to arrest black folk, but you're not willing to arrest Cubans. Now let's see why. You know why? Because without them Cubans, Ron DeSantis is not governor. He knows his voting base. Those Cubans put him into office, many of whom, by the way, they think they're white. Representative Anna Esquimani commented on a tweet DeSantis posted in support of the protesters in Cuba, calling him the governor who pushed legislation that's a means to silence racial injustice protests. Biblical scholar Will Gaffney noted that she doubted those protesting in Florida would face felony charges, as the law makes possible. However, she suspected it would be different if Haitians or BLM members of any race were in the same situation. Writing on Twitter, that's who the law was written for. Oli Fowler, a writer at Eater, also believed people would have been arrested if it was a BLM protest. When asked about the Cuban American protesters blocking the road, instead of addressing how the law would be applied, DeSantis turned attention to the protesters in Cuba. The Miami Herald additional editorial board criticized DeSantis' response, noting that the question highlighted the hypocrisy of the law that's arbitrarily enforced. In other words, this don't apply to y'all. It only applies to black people. Blatant racism, right in your face. Critical race theory. They're afraid of critical race theory. And they're now making laws, see, here we go again with the law, to keep their children from being exposed to critical race theory, because it's going to expose them for who they are to their own people. They then have to deal with the history. It no longer becomes black history. It becomes history, which is what it should have been all along. But we continue to do everything we can to make sure that those in our history, our ancestors, get the credit for the things that they've done, the contributions that they've made, the blood that they've shed, and the sweat that's in the soil of this country. This is us, y'all. They can get mad about critical race theory all they want, but at the end of the day, it's not going anywhere, just like we aren't. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Brian Forbes. You have participated in tonight's show of The Black Factor. And I want you all to know that I appreciate you 150%. I want to thank everybody for coming in and hanging out with me. Y'all don't forget to hit your like, subscribe, notifications, and all of the other buttons that you can hit that's going to keep me doing this show. Because I want you to know, I was in Chicago this weekend, y'all, and when people walk up to me and they tell me that they love what I'm doing and that this show brings information forward that helps, then I'm going to keep going. So y'all just stay tuned. It's getting ready to get greater later. By the way, for my Steppin' family that's on here, Inside Steppin' will return on Friday. Inside Steppin' is back, and we got a lot to talk about, y'all. So y'all get ready for that, because it's going to be a fire show. In fact, I got a great interview on that show coming up. I ain't going to say no names. It's going to be a surprise guest, so y'all get ready for that. You're going to enjoy it. It's going to be fire. It's going to be fire. So y'all get ready for that. And I just want to say good night. Thank you all for tuning in. And I guess I'm out, y'all. Love, peace, and chicken grease. I appreciate y'all.